In today's podcast, I am delighted to be joined by Andrew Woodman. Andrew, welcome aboard. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Now, I imagine most listeners might not be familiar with who you are and what you do.
I'll be surprised if anyone has a clue.
Well, I have heard, we've exchanged many an email over the years, and I've heard you on another podcast. So maybe there is an element of the audience that are familiar. So maybe let's kick things off with an introduction as to who you are, and then we'll get into some of the meat of the discussion.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Woodman. I work for a Conservative MP, Andrew Bridgen, who asked a very pertinent question a couple of weeks ago about the horse racing impact assessment and single customer wallet. I've been leading on the research for Andrew. As well as that, I've been a punter before I was legal, which I probably shouldn't admit. But having done that, I've got one of those stories which you think is made up, but is actually true. My first bet was in the 92 Grand National Party Politics, which won. And, your first winning bet cost you a fortune overall, of course. But it sort of set the scene for where I was going to go in years to come.
Yeah, very telling. Yeah, party politics. So you are interested, obviously you bet on horse racing. You were involved in a racing service as well, aren't you? We should be clear about that as well from the get-go. So you have a lot of interest and involvement day to day in racing and betting, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. I've had shares in various horses before, and I punt every day, and I've got a little bit of knowledge about the game. But there's always someone who's got more.
Of course. And it's very interesting, obviously, you mentioned you work for Andrew Bridgen, who's the MP for Leicestershire, North West Leicestershire, is that right? And
yes, that's right.
Yeah. And he was recently on a Nick Luck's show talking about a single custom wallet concept and talking about, the affordability issues. It'd be remiss of me not to ask you what you can share or what your knowledge is of what's taking place at the moment behind the scenes, if you like, in the political landscape.
Yes, well, Andrew's very much a libertarian, and that this issue did sort of come onto his radar. And obviously I demonstrated a few stories about what's happening with affordability. Andrew was obviously aware of the Gambling Harms Group and some of their asks. And previous to that, actually, I'll take a step back, because we first sort of got involved in this maybe 12, 18 months ago when the Gambling Review was announced. And fortunately, it wasn't actually me who had to raise it with Andrew. It was raised with him with a couple of other people. And obviously with my punting experience, we sort of had a bit of a discussion. And it was with sort of the breadth of the Gambling Review, because obviously we were lobbied by various people, including sort of small lotteries, that sort of thing, land-based casinos, various bookmakers, the breadth of sort of the gambling industry, who lobbying most MPs. But we took a bit of an interest in this. And we sort of came to the conclusion that a lot of the problems with sort of the gambling harms, it was anecdotal, but we did read up some evidence that, a lot of it did seem to stem from online slots, online casinos, that sort of thing. And obviously there was the FOBT issue, which sort of went on for years, and the minister, Tracy Crouch at the time, decided she'd had enough and went for £2. So it was inevitable that after that, they were going to start looking at online casinos, because you can stand in a betting shop and only play for £2 at a time. But if you've got Wi-Fi, you can be betting £500 a time. So it seemed pretty obvious that the government were going to come for that. But the danger was, if they start coming for that, well, do they start coming for the skilled stuff, sort of, the horse race betting, football betting, and that sort of thing, and start setting limits, which would have an enormous impact on the game, well, certainly with horse racing, on its funding. The people, betting and horse racing is intrinsically linked. So we produced sort of an article sort of suggesting, sort of 18 months ago, that there should really be a split. Obviously, you've been putting forward horse racing, football, golf, the skilled stuff shouldn't really be treated as the same as the unskilled. And we put in a few papers, spoke to the minister at the time, and sort of lobbied for that. And then, as is the way of things, other things come on, and we sort of get waylaid with other issues. So we sort of left that in. And then obviously there's been lots more talk in recent months. So we did return to it. And we, looking at the way things are going, there seems to be more of an issue with the data that bookmakers are requesting now. Obviously, they say some of that's related to what they're being asked to do from the Gambling Commission. So that there seems to be a bit of toing and froing at who's actually responsible for this. But from a libertarian angle, it never seems right that you should have to send in so much personal information to a third party. You don't know what the storage arrangements are, if it is going to be accessed. You get promises about, it will be all stored correctly, but unless you're there, you've not got a clue. So none of that sort of feels right. So we were looking at various solutions. And something which sort of came to us from sort of various articles we'd read, I believe this is something certainly my good friend Lee Keys put forward, and the APPG for Betting and Gaming Harm, their secretary, put forward the idea of sort of the single wallet, where a regulator, we don't know who that would be. I mean, it could be something like the Gambling Commission, but you look at the way that they've sort of dealt with gambling in recent years, it doesn't give you a huge amount of confidence, but it would be some sort of regulator where you send the information to them and they can do your know your customer, any anti-money laundering checks, that sort of thing, just so your person, and somewhere you can be confident that your personal data will not be used in a commercial way, which I think is becoming a concern of lots of punters and threatens, I think, to drive punters away from the game.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, and obviously it's a topic that's been going on for the best part of 18 months now. And let's talk about the single customer wallet, because it's an improvement. Obviously, we don't believe that these affordability checks need necessarily to be there, but the reality is, from what we understand, that it could well be taking place, and that there will be deposit limits or affordability limits. Is that still what you're hearing at the moment?
Well, there's lots of talk. I mean, obviously, I had the excellent Neil Channing on, whose politics we're a bit different from, but he spoke an awful lot of sense on New Recent Pod, and obviously he said about certain bookmakers are wanting 2,500, and there's the Gambling Harms who want 100. So it's being talked about. I don't think it can be ruled out. I think it will be very difficult to implement, because I say, going back to the FOBT thing and equalising it with, if FOBTs were to be treated the same as an online casino, for instance, how would you track affordability in cash? How would you do it on the race course? And then there's the spectre of the black market, of course, which, if we are worried about tracking people with gambling harm, if people are just going to go off the black market, then there is no chance of tracking their activities, and if they're going to end up in debt to nefarious people. So it's a very, very fine balance for the government. And I'm not sure if it can really work, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah. So this single customer view is the idea that put forward by bookmakers as a way to, well, many of us assume that it's just a way to get more data on the customers that they have and how they perform, maybe with other bookmakers and maybe their interests and what have you. But the idea is that each bookmaker would be able to see what you do with every other bookmaker, or your whole betting performance and your activity across the board. And there are many flaws with that concept, aren't there? Whereas the wallet, from what I understand, is it's overseen, it's independent, it's overseen, and that takes it away from the bookmakers needing to oversee, if I go and deposit, can I afford that? Well, they know, because the wallet tells them I'm allowed to put another £400 in, or, I'm at my limit for the month. So on that basis, it certainly works a lot more. Talk to me about, how it would be implemented and who might oversee such a wallet, because I believe there's people interested in tendering for such a project.
Yeah, I'm aware. I mean, obviously, you've got places like Skrill and PayPal who are experienced at that sort of thing. This is where you've got to, you may have potential issues, because you've got to have someone who can handle payments like a PayPal and a Skrill, but you've got to have a regulator who understands punting, who understands anti-money laundering, that sort of thing. And to be fair to the bookmakers, we don't know if some of these checks are down to inexperienced staff. We don't know if it's down to excessive regulation from the Gambling Commission. But clearly, somehow it's just not working. So I say it's an idea at the moment. It would have to be fleshed out, and obviously it's going to meet with some issues, but I can't believe that there isn't an engineering solution to this, whereby you can have good, experienced staff who know what they're doing, who can, A, understand punting, and B, look out for possible harm. But I think if it was to take deposits, then I think as against the single customer view, you could spot harm beforehand rather than after. So before the fact rather than after the fact, which I think would be one of the flaws of the single customer view.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there like the customer service, and that's something I hear regularly, in terms of people having to send the same information multiple times. The staff either, at best, perhaps they're just untrained. At worst, perhaps they're just deliberately being obtuse and ignoring and making life as difficult as possible for customers perhaps that they don't want. And so then, they're struggling at the moment with these affordability limits. So with the checks they've already put in, but then you put that across the board on everybody, and, everybody has to go through this across all firms. I can see many of the smaller firms struggling. How can, a smaller firm, a smaller independent company get involved in this, and the admin that would create, it just have a significant knock-on effect.
Yeah, I think it represents an opportunity for the industry, really, because their business should be bookmaking. It should be numbers, and in the old days it'd be chalking in your numbers and getting your percentages right. Yeah. But they're being taken over by compliance and that sort of thing. And the problem is, and it acts as a barrier, like you were saying, it's a barrier to entry into the market. If you want to set yourself up as a bookmaker, but you have to have a compliance team which is heavier than your actual trading team, you're going to struggle. So I don't think sort of the long term of the industry, I don't think this amount of regulation is good, because whilst the big boys may enjoy it at the moment, the innovation in markets tends to come from the small and the medium sized firms, and they'll probably end up with a stagnating market.
So, and one of the reasons that it's been brought in, obviously, the reason is to prevent people with a gambling disorder, people losing more money than they can afford. But I read, I think it was Lee who wrote, is it the Bar Stewards Inquiry, his podcast that he runs? I'm not sure if it's him or someone that works on it, wrote a very eloquent article that you referenced there about how it would work in practice. And if you've got, I don't know, however many bookmakers, and you've got 20 bookmakers all having to update their information about who's deposited what and where they're up to into a central system, there's lots of potential points of problem there, pain points, if you like, where maybe it doesn't update in real time. And we see and we hear these horror stories of people losing significant sums of money in a very short space of time, putting £500 and then putting another 1,000 and losing significant sums very, very quickly. And yet you have this situation here where the single customer view would allow potentially all these issues where if it's not updated straight away, then somebody can put a lot of money into the system and it doesn't actually protect the people it's there to protect.
Yeah, I think this is the issue, that it's after the fact. And that's where you'd have, hopefully the wallet would sort of help intervene, because you can set your limits at the start. And I say I'm a libertarian. I don't really believe in limits, because especially if you haven't supply information and that sort of thing to get limits raised. But, we certainly should be advising people to set their own limits. I don't think the state should set it for you, but I think people should be very much encouraged to sort of set their own limits and take responsibility for how much they're prepared to lose in a week or a month, or however it would be set up. Mm-hmm. So I think it would have a major impact on that.
And would it be net profit and loss across your bookmaker accounts? Because that's one of the concerns at the moment, isn't it? You could, have a bunch of money sitting in one account and want to deposit more into another, and you wouldn't be able to do that because it's not taking that into.
I think that's the problem. That's one of the major problems at the moment. That, and I think Neil said it in the previous podcast. You could be winning in 3 accounts but losing heavily in one. Mm-hmm. But the one you're losing in isn't prepared to take into account the amount you're winning in the other accounts. Mm-hmm. Plus, I don't know if it's a marker that bookmakers use, but if bookmakers know that you've got many accounts going on, they might be a bit less keen to do business with you.
I'm sure they would. A bit less keen. Understatement there.
That's putting it very, very mildly.
Let's talk about then separating, you referenced it earlier, separating skilled betting from casino slot betting. Something like this could also oversee, right, if you want to bet on a casino or roulette, your limits are significantly lower than if you want to bet on like a sport, a skill, like a racing or something like that sport, where perhaps well, I think the evidence is there that the gambling harm is not quite as serious, or there's not as, less people have an issue gambling harm-wise when it comes to skilled sports than they maybe do with stuff like roulette, which is a little bit more addictive, those kind of games. So you'd be able to separate it out, I presume.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think it is an important thing to separate out. I mean, you can lose so much money so quickly on the slots. It is unskilled. Yeah, sports betting isn't always skilled, but there's an element of skill to it. So I think that is the main call that we've certainly made over the years. But like I said before, with the betting shops, they've obviously decided £2 is right. Well, and you can bet what you want on the horses, on the dogs, on the football, on the golf, and that sort of thing. And that seems to be working in shops. Obviously, there is always going to be problem gamblers, and you can't eliminate problem gamblers. All you can really do is offer as many programs to help and identify them as possible. So I think if it appears to be working in shops, I think that's probably the way it should go online. You do have the risk, of course, of the black market again, and there will be those offering crypto casinos and that sort of thing. But the government's also got this online harms bill going through at the moment, which is being overseen by the same minister, funnily enough. So whether that comes into it, whether there's some way of blocking the crypto sites, I'm not sure. But the internet is so difficult to govern. How much effect any of this will have, who knows? But
the idea is, though, to take away from that straight ability to load up on your phone, to get straight into it, to have it right front and centre, have emails and pushed marketing direct to people who are vulnerable, saying, come and spin on the roulette here. It's one thing going off to the black market and having to put that time and effort in. That's you can't necessarily protect against that, but you can absolutely stop it from people getting front and centre and getting all these.
Absolutely. I think in a regulated market, you can't turn a blind eye to this. So, and now that's what we asked for back 18 months to 2 years ago, whatever it was. And, I think that's really the way we should go, but we'll have to see what comes out in the review.
Indeed. And I want to pick up on something that Andrew Bridgen said in his interview with Nick Luck, because Nick asked him quite rightly about the Gambling Commission saying that bookmakers wouldn't abuse data if they received it for their own purposes. Now, I don't know if you read some of the stories. Cracked Labs, they did a story on how much data Sky bet. It didn't seem to pick up, funnily enough, didn't get any traction in the media. The Racing Post couldn't even quote the name of the report, just said a report in a line or two, which is very interesting to see. Their industry editor hasn't touched the story. But obviously you have the belief, and so is Andrew Bridgen, that your bookmakers just can't be trusted with data to do the right thing.
Well, I think there's certainly questions which have to be answered. And there's, you see so many stories on Twitter, and I think 888, they obviously got a very big fine.
Not the first fine from 888 either. They had a similar one 5 years ago.
If this does keep happening, it does create a narrative. And I'm sure the minister doesn't need to be told by us. The minister will be aware. These things will be brought to his attention, certainly by the Gambling Commission. And with all of this, the industry isn't putting itself in the greatest position to request more data. And that doesn't really have to be Andrew pointing that out. The Gambling Commission will be pointing that out to the minister, as will many constituents, I'm pretty sure. So I think the question does have to be asked about safeguards. And to be honest, with some of the information that's reported to be requested, I mean, you wouldn't expect that to be requested if you're applying for a mortgage or applying for some sort of credit. But to do it to withdraw your own money, it all seems a bit over the top. And, like I said before, if that's coming from the Gambling Commission, then the Gambling Commission's got to review whether it is right to instruct operators to request so much data. And I'm surprised the Information Commissioner doesn't get more involved, because we don't know where, although the operators say it's stored safely and you take them at their word, no one really knows. No one really knows where all this data's ending up, and governments have had data leaks in the past. I'm sure it's not impossible that some of this data could possibly leak and would be worth an absolute fortune to potential nefarious individuals.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Gambling Commission there. I'm intrigued on what the sense is around them and their future, because they've come in for heavy criticism for things like Football Index, obviously some high-profile stories there, and their failure potentially to monitor. We saw, like you said, a fine this week, but these fines seem to be coming up, and it's treated almost as a cost of doing business, a tax for bookmakers because, well, they make so much money. These fines are just a slight annoyance. So it does seem, and then I hear from punters as well regularly talking about, well, the Gambling Commission is not interested in my problem. I have a dispute with a bookmaker, or they're not enforcing their rules. I'm putting out a podcast ahead of this one, which is going to be talking about that. So what's the sense of the Gambling Commission? Because they seem to be failing, all sides of the people involved in this. Is there a discussion about them and their future?
Well, I'm not sure what the Gambling Commission is actually for. I mean, I don't know if it knew itself. So it created its sort of niche. We're going to chase down problem gambling. But then they had to admit they had no way of measuring it. Now, any organisation that has no way of measuring the impact of its measures is always going to be open to criticism. But there's certainly no sense that punters feel that it's there representing them. Because, I say, if you are having withdrawal issues and you're having to provide your P60, your bank statements, and all kinds of personal information, which, like I say, you would only really expect to present for a mortgage, and they just sort of sit by and are comfortable with this. And that's never going to make punters think well of them.
No, I spoke with one guy recently who won some money with one firm, and they wanted 3 years of bank statements. 3 years. He said he wouldn't give them to his wife.
No, no, exactly. I wouldn't do either. So hopefully my wife doesn't listen. But it needs a reboot, I think. It needs to actually work out what it's for, who it's representing, and how it's measuring its impact. But again, say Neil raised it, I mean, considering the size of the industry, it's not that well funded, and I think the expertise within the organisation could be said to be questionable, certainly of the gambling industry.
Well, I had another guest who said apparently it's a prerequisite, or used to be, that you didn't work or had previous work for a bookmaker.
Yes, yeah.
To work at the Gambling Commission. So there you go. Yeah, a lack of maybe...
Well, yeah, but would you have a banking regulator who had no experience in financial services?
Exactly.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
No. So it certainly seems their future's up for grabs. And I think in addition to that, you've got dispute resolution services. IBAS is one, a well-known one, eCogra. And we have an issue with these services as well, whereby they are apparently funded by the bookmakers they oversee disputes between and customers. And then there is questions about, well, how independent can they be? In any walk of life, when you have that.
There's all kinds of questions about the levy is funded by losing punters, essentially. The horse racing levy, that never feels like a comfortable position. I don't think the BHA are particularly comfortable with that. It's a bit like the fan-led football review. It feels like it's all going towards an ombudsman.
Yeah.
Whether that would improve things or not, I'm not sure. A lot of this depends on the quality of the appointments and the quality of the team around them. But when there's, like in the football industry, when there seems to be problems dotted around all over the place, no one really knows who's in charge. No one knows why they're implementing the measures that they're implementing. It feels like there just needs to be someone to come in and get a grip of it and sort of reset the whole game, really. Mm-hmm. And we'll see if that is an ombudsman. I would imagine that it would be, it will form part of the conversation, but then got to work out what's the ombudsman going to do and how effective they're going to be and what sort of powers will they have. Because considering the size of the gambling industry, that would be a very powerful position, and you've got to have someone of outstanding quality or an organisation of outstanding quality to govern that properly.
Yeah.
So it remains to be seen. There's no silver bullet to any of these things. You usually just come up with something in the middle which works for most people. Yeah,
because it's got to be, it's like I say, there's lots of complex issues here, and the narrative has been driven, understandably, by the issues of people losing lots of money and like a gambling disorder and protecting those people, but there obviously are lots of other arguments, and they're the ones that I've been trying to make, and we discussed today about bookmakers delaying or maybe abusing AML checks or security checks to prevent withdrawals and just making life difficult because they know there is no comeback for customers who, beyond taking them to small claims court, which is what a lot of people are doing these days. So yeah, there's a lot of questions to be asked and obviously no real simple answers, but
yeah, and to be honest, the bookmakers really aren't helping themselves because they're creating a lack of confidence in the industry. And in the long term, it may help in the next 3 months accounts or something like that. But in the long term, you're only damaging yourself. I think Andrew uses a phrase for that bookmakers should be farmers, not hunters.
Yeah.
So they should look after the customer on a long-term relationship, because undoubtedly it'd be worth more to them than just hunting them down.
I was going to ask you about obviously you talk about their reputation and bookmakers, how they're viewed, but what happened with the FOBT issue? Because they used to say, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the limits in shops were proposed, these community hubs, it will be a disaster for bookmakers. So many of these shops will close down. We'll have to we'll lose lots of staff. But the reality has not quite been that, has it? So there's people looking at it from the political, well, you were wrong there, so why should we listen to you now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've expanded a bit of goodwill there, unfortunately. I remember saying at the time, if they'd have accepted maybe £10 or £20 instead of clinging on to this £500, they'd have probably got away with it and we wouldn't be at the point we are now. And from the conversations I've had, I think they accept that, and they accept that they got it wrong, which is why I think they are trying to propose things like single customer view and looking at the whole experience. I think that there's some warm words coming from the industry, but it needs to be matched by action.
Yeah.
And, going around sort of trying to block withdrawals and that sort of thing. I mean, the damage Coral did to the reputation, for instance, with that recent Twitter exchange where, was it £100 at 4-1? And then they asked, well, have you got to play? We want you to play it, or why are you withdrawing? It's not really any of your business. I mean, that sort of thing, and of course that went...
They go viral, don't they?
It goes viral, and that's something which I think the industry really needs to be really careful of now, because these things will go viral. It's going to damage the reputation, not just of the individual companies, but the industry as a whole.
But it's the same issue with the black market that gets raised by the Betting and Gaming Council, who represent the big bookmakers, as a potential issue if affordability was coming at too high a level, or too low a level, if you like. But the reality is the black market has already had a lot of people pushed to it by issues whereby if bookmakers with a license are treating me like this, well, what's the advantage of using them? I may as well go and use these firms, but maybe don't offer me that fund protection, or maybe there's a slight risk that they might not pay me out, but there's always that risk with a licensed bookmaker. So I find it a little bit hard to hear that narrative from the BGC talking about the black market when their members are already involved in pushing people to it already.
Yeah, it is a bit of a flaw in their argument, really, which has been pointed out. If that argument is going to be used, then you've got to start looking at minimum liabilities, really, certainly in wind market.
Is there any appetite for that kind of MBL? It's something I've talked about as we would need legislation, really, because you one bookmaker couldn't offer it. They just get filled in. They need to be across the board. I
think the concept has been raised. I mean, certainly it works in Australia. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the bookmaking industry would help itself if, for instance, in the Cheltenham markets, instead of being limited to 20p and being limited to now 60p, that's no good for anyone. I mean, if they actually sort of raise the limits in races, a lot of this comes from the bookmakers being petrified about being taken on for, that was the example that Neil mentioned, wasn't there? Was it 16-1 into 3-1 and those sort of things? Yeah. But you would think in the big festivals and the big days that the risk of that's got to be fairly minimal. I mean, and certainly with the amount of turnover you've got going on, there's no real excuse for not offering decent bets in Cheltenham Festival or the Grand National. I mean, the idea that you're restricted to £1.29 on the Grand National is, it makes the industry look ludicrous.
It does. And that's probably just a simple box or some option where it says, well, this person's restricted, but on these big festivals or whatever, when it comes to a World Cup or a big event where they're swimming in money and trade liquidity.
I can understand that, they'd want to be careful in sort of a Monday cellar at Plumpton or something like that in the mud where there might be plots going on and that sort of thing. But I can't understand why things like the Cheltenham Festival are treated the same as that.
So I always wanted to ask you about, your boss again, if you like, Andrew Bridgen, and he did mention with his interview with Nick Luck that, or he actually asked him a question in Parliament. We asked Chris Philp if he'd meet him because he was concerned about some of these issues that we've raised. Has that meeting took place? And if so, are you able to reveal anything? I mean, this podcast will probably go out in a few weeks' time, so it might be out of date by then. So you may be covered by that.
Yes, I mean, it has taken place. It was described as a useful meeting. I think Chris Philp is obviously, again, referring back to Neil again, Chris Philp is obviously an ambitious politician. I think he's a sensible politician. And, we do have extremes on both sides. I think he will find some sort of resolution in the middle, but, it's on public record. He said that this should not have an impact on racing. Well, if it's not going to have an impact on racing, affordability will impact racing. There's no doubt about it. So that's got to form part of the impact assessment. So I would be hopeful that we're not going to have the issues with affordability, which to the scale which many people fear.
Okay. There you go. That's
a politician's answer for you.
But you know what? I was going to wrap things up by asking you for your prediction, like I asked for Neil's prediction. And, some things, I guess, we're all on the same page, where there may be a ban on certain advertising and certain other things. But when it comes to that affordability limit, that'd be really interesting. And I think, if maybe it's segregated into different types of betting, especially on horse racing, is separate from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the evidence suggests that the shops and online probably need to be brought into line. And there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of issues in being raised about what's happening in shops. So that would be my prediction, that we'll see a similar situation online as we see in shops.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what we talked about earlier as well, the wallet and the single customer view, what do you see unfolding there? I know bookmakers are kind of resistant to the wallet because they encourage us to like odd shopping, if you like, and makes people less brand loyal, which obviously is a key element for them.
Yeah.
Where do you see things moving on that front?
I think we might see something maybe in the middle of it all. I think there is going to be some sort of mechanism whereby punters can be looked at, identified at being at harm across platforms, but I think there will be resistance to giving any further access to data to bookmakers. So how that circle squares, we'll have to see, but I think that's probably what we're going to see.
Oh, very interesting, very encouraging as well. Some of the things you've spoken about today. Like I said, this probably put this out until after Cheltenham, so it could be out of date by then. But let's hope not, because things do move very fast in politics, don't they? So,
I'd imagine we're going to be looking at post the local elections before we see this come out with Herder and that sort of thing. So that's 2 months.
2 months.
First week in May, the local elections. So I'd be surprised if anything comes out before that.
And are they still listening? Because obviously, there's a lot of debate right now, and the civil servants are drawing it up, as far as I believe, in terms of the white paper. Is there still like ongoing consultations? Are they willing to reach out and listen to people on different sides of the argument?
Yeah, I mean, like Neil said, a white paper is a bit of a menu, and it will have to go through a lot of scrutiny. It will get scrutinised line by line. Various organisations will do their impact assessment. So when the white paper comes out, that's not necessarily, that's not going to be how it finishes up. So yeah, there's going to be plenty of time. There's going to be plenty of lobbying and time to lobby your local MP or the minister or whoever in the months and years to come.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be a few MPs enjoying days out at Bookmakers Hospitality.
Well, I would imagine invites will be will be circulated.
Yeah. Well, maybe the dream as well. The legend has it there's some MPs that get unrestricted accounts, so they can get each way bets down on those funky 8-way handicaps where you've got an odds-on favourite and you can take the second. That's the legend. So I don't know if you've got that, Andrew.
I've heard. Well, I'm Tim got an account. So no, funny enough, I was talking to someone about that who was sort of in the know about it. And I think that is more of a legend than anything else. I think it may have been, I don't know, but it may have been a more generous account than some. But I don't think it was a grand down on the 6-1 against the 2-7 favourites, and cash will flow.
I saw that today. That's why it made me think.
I don't think anyone's that generous. Certainly not anymore. So I don't think anything like that exists anymore. I'd be surprised if it does.
Okay.
So,
well, yeah,
you never know.
I'd be very surprised.
We live in hope.
Yeah.
It's certainly never been offered to me.
No, I probably won't be after this podcast, I'm sure. All right. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me today, Andrew. I know viewers see you've got your Derby County top on, so I wish Derby County all the best to stay up. Although being an Everton fan, I'm always ambivalent towards what Rooney does. But
I would imagine that by the time this goes out, we'll be relegated. But I just hope that we still exist as a club at that stage.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so many changes going on right now, and so much change of ownership. So who knows? It could be
Well, we may have won 3 on the trot, and I might look like an idiot after saying that. But we live in hope. But as in gambling, it's the hope that kills you, isn't it?
It is. It's the hope that kills you. Yes. Right. Well, thank you ever so much, Andrew, for sharing your expertise today. Hopefully, by the time this goes out, it won't be out of date. But it's a long process. This, and it's interesting, fascinating to hear about, especially the political aspect of what's going on behind the scenes and how that all works and how people are viewing things. So, yeah, really interesting to get your feedback today.
Excellent. Thanks a lot.